Hi, and welcome to Untold Radio. This is Down South Anomalies. My name's Jay Katz, and I'm joined each week by my beautiful wife, Aspasia.
I
was going to actually call you your stage name, Miss Death, because it's so
it's very
appropriate for
appropriate
this
today.
episode.
It is, yeah.
Because we're death tripping in this episode
Yes, we
with
are.
the one and only, one of the most astounding writers on the planet, Jackie Dent. But prior to getting to that,
yes.
we should tell everyone what we say every week, and that is that we are broadcasting on stolen land, part of the Gadigal Nation, the Aurora.
The Gadigal people of the Eora Nation.
Yes, and we want to acknowledge.
Yep.
I always get dyslexic with that.
You do. We want to acknowledge the elders past, present and emerging.
So pay some respect there. Now, you are on the Untold Radio Network, and even though this is a pre-record, we need your support more now than ever.
Because you do sit on that chat when it drops.
Oh, yeah, I sit on that chat.
You're on there chatting away to the people.
Well, it's great to have the support and those people live.
For sure.
So, look, your questions will not be answered by our guest, but they will be answered by us.
Unless she wants
Jackie's got some time and wants to sit on that.
She's a very busy person.
Oh, incredibly busy. Let's just play this promo now for Super Chat.
Show your support for the Untold Radio Network family of shows and join in on the conversation by using super stickers and super chats on YouTube. Got a question you want answered? Ask it live via a super chat and get real-time responses from our shows, knowledgeable hosts, and guests. Help keep the Untold Radio Network shows running strong. We need your support. Send your super chats and stickers now.
Oh, that was lovely. You did that well. I love that American voice.
Did you see that? Somebody $100 would be a pretty important question for $100.
Look, it's not so much the question, it's supporting the network. They have now 11 podcasts. So you can get at least 1.5 podcasts a day. Yeah, and so it is knocking, and it's free. It's accessible to everyone.
Absolutely.
Subscribe and support the network.
All right, let's get on with our...
Jackie Dent has written an astounding book.
Yes, she has.
The Great Dead Body Teachers. I'll have to ask her what the not so great dead body teachers are. Do you know what I mean?
I'm going to
pop that book up because people need to go
to
every single service, including that mammoth Leviathan they called Amazon, and purchase this book, because this book is important. Not since Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book on death and dying has such an amazing tome.
Or Grey's Anatomy.
Okay. All right. Now, Jackie has had an interest in death since she was a child. Now, this worries me. It's a bit Jeffrey Dahmer-like, but she was not so much about killing things. She was about bringing things back from the dead.
Okay.
And I think
I think she's got a fascination with dead bodies.
Yeah,
maybe.
Exhuming dead bodies and looking what it's all about, decay's all about. And she is a very respected journalist.
Absolutely.
And she has written for just about everyone you can imagine, from the Sydney Morning Herald, the Guardian, Reuters, the New York Times, Struth. I wonder if she ever wrote for Crikey. But anyway, she's also worked in tandem with the UN all over the world. Can you believe that? She's also a great lecturer. She's done organised TED Talks in this country and many other things.
TEDx Sydney,
Yep. And she's never asked us to do a TED Talk, but maybe one day.
Why would she?
Well,
seriously, what do we have to talk
We're complete nuts. But the other thing is that she's a broadcaster.
Yes, she is.
She's an extraordinary dancer. Did you check her out on the dance floor at Kinsella's that night? She's a profound dancer.
I haven't seen that on her resume, but we can attest to that.
All right, let's welcome to Untold Radio Down South Anomalies, episode 28, the one and only Jackie Dent.
Hello.
Hi, how are you? Well, that was a very impressive intro. Thank you.
You deserve an impressive intro, and it is an absolute pleasure to have you with us. You're a native Sydney-sider, and we're so lucky and proud to have you in our midst. How did this extraordinary journey to this profound book begin?
Well, this has got a very personal,
family attachment.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's very personal.
Yeah. So I know. So how did I end up writing a book about dissection? So basically, my My grandparents on my dad's side both donated their bodies to the University of Queensland. So Ruby went to UQ in 1969, and my grandfather, Julie, yes, that was his name, he went in 1981. So it's always been this.
Is this granddad?
Yes, that's Julie there. Yes, that's Julie there. And so, yeah, it is a great shot. And so, and there's Ruby. It's Ruby, and Ruby died before I was born, and so I unfortunately didn't meet her, but I kind of have vague memories of Julie. But it was always this thing in the family that they'd both donated their bodies to university to be studied. And so the important thing to point out, which everyone gets confused about, is that whole body donation is really different to organ donation. Yeah, so just in case people are confused, so whole body donation is when you are completely dead and you your family member will ring the university because you've already, in Australia, they'll call the university because you've already done the paperwork, and your body will go to the university, you'll be embalmed, and, all sorts of things will happen. But with organ donation, you die, you're in a hospital, and parts of your body are harvested. But you'd be surprised how many people have asked me about organ donation and body. I think there's a bit of confusion. So, anyway, so it's just been this thing in the family that my grandparents donated their bodies to science.
Just to clarify that, Jackie, all body donation is just like organ donation. You make that decision prematurely. It's not a decision that's made after you die by the family.
No, you have to make I don't know, unless your family. But
I'm asking Jackie the question.
Yeah, but do you think that anybody would actually want to give their mum or their dad or both of them?
I think it's a great thing to donate your body to science.
Well, actually, this is a very controversial thing, though. So like in Australia, we have what's called gold standard. So you have to do the paperwork. A next of kin has to sign the paperwork. But in most parts of the world, the anatomists are still using unclaimed bodies. So they might be people that died in a hospital or have died in a situation, and they haven't been identified, and so they sit in the morgue for a few years, and then they end up being dissected. Unfortunately, in many parts of the world, people are still being dissected without their consent.
Right.
Okay.
So let's just clarify that. Do you need to, prior to death, be the person that states, I'm going to donate my whole body, or is that something your family members can do on death?
In Australia and in like many parts, like, Britain, sort of Western countries, you have to do the paperwork. So you have to fill out the forms, you have to say, yes, I agree to this, tick some boxes, and you have to get a family member to sign it as well. So when I was researching the book, some anatomists were telling me that people do ring up and say, oh, yeah, mum really wanted to donate their body. And the reason why people do that is because you get a free cremation. So once the anatomists have finished studying your body, you will be cremated, and then the ashes are given back to the family.
What's left of you? What's
left of you? Yes. So you will be. So that's another issue that's in anatomy these days, is that there's a tendency for people that are a bit poorer maybe to donate their bodies to science. But look, all sorts of people do.
Costs. Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. And the difference is, I mean, an organ donor, hopefully your organs will go to a recipient. But when you donate your whole body, it is then primarily used as a teaching aid?
Yeah, look, it's pretty diverse what happens. And every anatomy school in the world is different. Every anatomy school in Australia is different. But so, for example, if I donated my body to the University of Melbourne, there's a couple of things that could happen. And the reason I quote University of Melbourne is because they were really helpful when I was writing the book. What tends to happen with body donation these days is that you will be what's called prosected. So you'll be kind of chopped up into bits. So they'll have my arms, legs, various body parts. And then a professional dissector or a technician will do all the kind of, dissection is actually a craft, and it's a very hard craft, and very highly skilled technicians do it these days. So they will either dissect you or plastinate your arm. And then that way, like, all sorts of students can study that particular body part. There might be jaw, bits of jawbone that
is this
are
a
used.
plastination?
No. Actually, that's pretty amazing. That's a wax model, but he looks like he's about to ask for a coffee, isn't he, in a French cafe? He's so glamorous, yes. But so that's one of the wax models at the University of Melbourne.
Let's have a look at that glamour.
That was a.
Oh yeah, so the face is highly stylized.
Yeah, he's got a bit of patrician glamour to him, doesn't he?
Absolutely.
But and if you see, it's got written Tramond Paris. So in the book, aside from sort of me investigating what might have happened to my grandparents' bodies, I really went down an incredible rabbit hole with the art world, anatomy and art museum. Right. So for all I know, my grandparents I don't think they were, but what happens is that in the past, body parts were put into museums so that people could study them.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that interesting? I trained as a nurse at Royal Prince Alfred in the late 70s, and we were, I think, the last year to actually be trained in situ in the hospital itself. So underneath the female wing of the nursing home, because there were so few male nurses.
The female dormitory, you mean, the nurses' dormitory.
Yeah. Because we ended up with the doctors there at one stage, which was exciting for about a year. And then they popped us down the bottom, and nursing allocations were like Gestapo-like in keeping the men away from the women.
Three of you, three male?
There was 3 or 4 of us, and there was nurses. Like hundreds of women literally above us.
Oh, wow. Anyway, unusual a male nurse in those days.
Down in the basement was this beautiful, in sort of like a see-through fiberglass, dissected real-life person right down the middle.
Right, across
and
section.
It was on coasters. You could wheel it out. And I kept looking at that thinking, I would love to take that home.
Okay, yeah.
It is extraordinary. Like I a lot of anatomical museums are closed to the public. And I mean, in the past, they used to be open to the public, and it was almost like a pastime to go and check out a dissection or to go to an anatomical museum. But these days it's kind of closed off. And the thing is, when you see that stuff, it is incredible how beautiful we are. I sound like Celine Dion, but we are really beautiful on the inside.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, look, I remember going to, I think it was the Macleay Museum at Sydney Uni as a school excursion when I was in high school. So this was in the early mid-70s, and we went to the Macleay Museum, and the thing that fascinated me the most were the fetuses in jars, and I was like, oh, I'd like to take one of those home, but you're not allowed to. So, but
see, I don't know. I'm really squeamish. I don't know if I could have anything like that in the house. So it was kind of a tricky thing for me when I was researching this book, because I'm not really very good with all that. I can't even really watch Operation Ouch on ABC Kids. Like I'm not really very good with blood.
Yeah. But what an incredibly courageous thing to do, though, to search out. Wasn't it an emotional issue for you that you needed to find out what had happened to your grandparents?
Yeah, look, that's a really interesting question, Jay, because I did find it very confronting, like, thinking about what happened to them, like actually, because I think a lot of us imagine what it's like in a dissecting room and an anatomy lab and body parts being cut up and, are people respectful or disrespectful? And, there were times when some of the older doctors and surgeons that I interviewed sort of really went into detail about dissection. And also I watched a lot of dissection TV. That if you go to YouTube, you'll see there's a whole body of work. There's actually like dissection influencers these days. And it was, it was pretty hardcore for me to watch. Like but I got used to it, I got used to it. And the thing too is that I was often very sensitive about the fact that, these are my dad's parents. And but the thing in a way is I part of the goal of this book in a way was I just want to take the shame away from dissection. People that got dissected have changed the world through medicine. And I know it seems like a really gross thing to do and that happened, but I kind of wanted to make dissection. So to me, it's not so scary and yucky anymore.
It's not a gross thing to do. And look, I've always lived under the assumption, my wife was correcting me prior to this interview, that in Western culture...
Oh, surprise, surprise.
Thank you, Jackie. Another nail in my coffin, so to speak. That, in Western culture, we seem to avoid the notion of death as much as we can. other indigenous cultures throughout the
or
world
just other cultures,
celebrate it. I mean, I believe that the Marai in New Zealand and native Maori culture, they actually transport the body around for days.
Yeah.
And so there is this awareness. It's visually out there in front of you. And believe me, it was a shock for me, although you psychologically try to prepare yourself. But as a nurse, when you go to your first autopsy and actually witness that, and I actually witnessed someone I was nursing days prior. So it was really profound.
That's confronting. Yeah, that's confronting. Yeah.
So do you think, is that part of the emphasis behind writing this book? Was that a thought that ever crossed your mind, that this is something that remains sort of taboo and we need to actually get over this and be aware of our own mortality?
Oh, look, I mean, it's kind of the backstage of medicine. I just don't think people realize how anatomy and cutting up the dead happens every weekend, all around the world, every day, and it's how science happens. And I'm not a very scientific person, so I was pretty nervous at first, like tackling a scientific topic. But aside from me getting into the details of dissection and learning more about the science, the thing that I found really fascinating is that anatomy is a way to actually teach students about death. Like you would have thought that death was there all along, because you've got dead bodies and corpses. But increasingly over time, in many medical schools, having a dead body on the table teaches students about, well, this is actually death. This is what will happen with your patients. You will see dead bodies. I mean, I do think, like, I grew up in the Philippines, and so I was exposed from a young age to a really different death culture. So I've often been accused of being kind of like a deathy. And to me, it just seems really weird, because I'm like, well, people die, and I actually think it's really important to know, like, seriously, what's the next big thing that's going to happen in our lives, really, when we think about it?
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I might lose my Opal card at the train station. I might not be able to get, I don't know, something might happen with my tax return. But in the scheme of things, like, it's the next big thing. And definitely in Australia, it's like it doesn't even happen. I think I make the joke in the book, like, there is no death. Go to the beach, mate.
Yeah, and I think that's a really salient point.
It is, because
I think it's really important that we're aware that we need to actually get over this. And can you clarify to us, and I'm sorry to interrupt you there, but clarify to us, what was the difference in that Filipina culture in comparison to back here in Australia?
Well, it was just much more. I mean, they had open coffin at funerals, for starters. And like, when you drove around the streets, there were actually like coffin shops. So, it's sort of like a barrio style, it's a different, you had big shopping malls, but, you would drive around, and how you've got like your main street of shops. There'd be like the coffin shop, and you'd see the coffins. And also people would have coffins and play cards. If there was an open coffin in the street, people would play cards and drink next to the body. But also the Filipinos had, in the Filipino culture, it's Catholic on steroids. And so they have really full-on religious festivals. And so, when I was a kid, I saw to this day, they still do mock crucifixion. So they do the hands, but they don't do the feet. And they have these really elaborate religious festivals and parades. So when I was a kid, a little girl, I would see these. They were mannequins of Jesus, like beautiful mannequins floating down the street in sort of these glass cases. And I think somehow it sort of like got me thinking, oh, wow, they look so beautiful. Is that a dummy? Is it a real person who's alive or dead? So it's kind of, it definitely shaped my kind of, what's the big deal about, I mean, of course, death is devastating. People die and it's horrible. But in terms of talking about it and exploring it, the Philippines definitely reared me to be a bit more relaxed about it.
Now,
I was just going to say, because it's such, I mean, everybody dies, and we all know someone that's died. We all know lots of people that have died. But the whole process has been taken away from people of, dealing with the body. It's just been, the body's just whisked away. And I know in Anglo, I've been to quite a few Anglo, funerals, and it's like you hear that the person's died, and unless you're immediate family, you don't even see them dead. You go to the usually to a crematorium, and the coffin's up the front there, and you have the service, you see the pictures, and then it goes into the gets on the conveyor belt behind the curtain, and that's it. It's done. I know. So the first time I went to a Greek funeral, oh my God, it was like, the coffin in the church, and it was open.
We go days beforehand too.
Oh, no, that's the viewing, but everyone goes to the viewing, and everybody's screaming and carrying on.
And kissing.
And then, everybody files past the dead body in the box and kisses it, every single person.
Yeah.
So it's not and they all touch the dead person, and it's like you're looking at death in the face, and you're like, yep, that guy's dead. They ain't coming back again. And and the difference is just like you don't even get to see that person as being dead. It's just been so sanitized. So
well, do you know something fascinating actually about the Greeks is that so as part of the book I was looking into whole body donation, like why do people do it? And there's all sorts of fascinating reasons. Some people do, obviously people do it to help science.
Sure.
Some people do it to because they think their body's interesting. And that the doctors might want to have a look at them.
Yeah.
And I find that kind of funny. But the other kind of hilarious, pretty fascinating, is that some people don't want a particular relative at their funeral. So they will donate their bodies. They'd rather get dissected than have like that person at their funeral. And the other thing the funeral thing was quite interesting. In Greece, there was all this research done probably about 20 years ago by an anthropologist, which showed that in Greece they've got these particular funerary practices where they bury a body and then they exhume it.
Oh, no, you get exhumed 2 years later.
Yes.
Everybody gets exhumed 2 years later. Your body, and your bones are given to the family to do with whatever.
Yeah, they store them. So basically what's happened in Greece, though, is that because you couldn't do cremation, but I think you can now. It's changed.
Yes,
I think the Greek culture has changed.
Yep,
but there is a section in the book where I talk about how Greek people were donating their bodies because they hated these rituals of exhuming the bodies, because in some instances, apparently the bodies aren't in a very good state, and it's quite confronting for the family to have to see this. So it is. I thought that was quite interesting that
they're a bit cray-cray, the Greeks, I reckon.
No, they're not.
They are.
You know what the beauty is about your culture? I mean, look at us. We have always got death on the mind because someone close to us or someone we know is about to die. That's why we're perpetually wearing black. And that's part of the Greek culture, to mourn that death for a long time.
Yeah, forever.
And believe me, I've been to some of the most astounding funerals with your family, where people are literally throwing themselves onto the casket.
Hey, you're.
Oh, I know that happened in my family, but my family were cray-cray, But isn't that incredible?
Yeah, it is.
When you think about it.
Yes, I think it's almost you kind of have to put on a bit of a show to show people that you're actually really.
You gave a damn.
Well, that you cared and you're mourning, and
you're not running after the inheritance.
Oh, God. Anyway,
so it sounds like you went down so many different ways of perceiving how death is dealt with. Tell us some of the most fascinating avenues that you ended up researching.
Oh my God. Okay. It's like a football field of rabbit holes. Like I just kept falling into rabbit holes. So, one thing I found, so my grandparents died, and initially I thought I was just going to, I was just going to research dissection. But then, when bodies get to the university, then they're embalmed. And I hadn't even thought about embalming at all, right? And I always thought embalming fluid was like, there's just a canister on the shelf and they just pump the chemicals in and there you go. No, oh my gosh, it's like this whole new world of embalming fluid opened up, and I ended up interviewing an anatomist in Austria called Eric Brenner, who wrote this really amazing paper about the history of embalming and contemporary embalming. And there's literally, like, in a contemporary setting, there is like so many different types of chemicals. And one of the big issues with embalming is that with bodies is mold. And so when I first heard about this, I was like, oh my God, I don't really want to know about mold. But
moldy bones.
Sort of ended up learning about that. But The other thing I found super interesting was that one technician told me that some people have secret recipes. So there's this sort of secret recipe embalming scene, which I kind of got into. And apparently what will happen is that one anatomist will, get a new job at a university, and he might introduce his new technique to that university, and then they all sort of slowly adopt it. But the thing I found kind of a bit sad about embalming fluid is that apparently, because of EU regulations and concerns about formaldehyde, which is kind of, on the carcinogenic list, they're thinking that they're going to have generic kind of one-size-fits-all embalming fluids in Germany. So as you can see, I just went off into these rabbit holes. So I found embalming fluid pretty fascinating. And also, have you heard of Gunther von Hagens?
Yes.
Yeah, so he does the Body Worlds thing, right?
Yeah.
So basically, Gunther is like the pin-up for embalming and the anatomical world in the contemporary setting. Like, he absolutely revolutionized embalming. And so a lot of people talked about Gunther. People have gone and trained with Gunther. There's a lot of controversy around him because they think he maybe used to use unclaimed bodies, but now he's all above board and uses. And apparently there's like hundreds and hundreds of people wanting to donate their bodies to him so that they can be in those exhibitions.
Immortalized, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that the embalming thing was like, I was not expecting that at all.
He literally turned the corpse into an art form.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, like he's absolutely changed it. And there was a really interesting interview that his wife gave a few years ago about how the reason why they started doing the figures sort of moving and standing, in the way that they do is that their first exhibition was in Japan. And apparently the bodies were sort of lying down and they were dissected, and people found it a bit confronting. And so they started looking at old pictures of anatomical drawings, and Vesalius. There's Andreas Vesalius is like sort of what Einstein is to.
Is this
so they started. They were inspired by Vesalius, and look at this figure.
You can
this figure
see that in his work, can't you?
Yeah. So they started saying, well, let's have our figures moving in the landscape, and let's have them, being active instead of sort of lying there like it's sort of a dead corpse. So Vesalius really is if you're going to do 101 anatomy, it's all about him. He's like the Michael Hutchence of the time. Like, he was a real rock star. Really? I imagine him wearing this glittery cod piece, But yeah, those drawings, that book from 1543 changed the history of medicine, really.
Is this one of them? Yeah, no?
Well, no, this is another incredible, and that was the other rabbit hole I suppose I went into, was anatomical art. So this is a really fascinating 1800s surgeon and anatomist called Joseph McLeese.
Right.
And so look at the figures. They're, they're absolutely beautiful. And did you see the way they've got the detail? Well, they've still got sort of the string around their hands. And so there's long been a debate in anatomical art about, how beautiful do you depict the body? So there's other anatomical artists that the pictures are quite ugly. But I'd say, look at McLeese.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just beautiful.
Incredible.
And it is incredible. And there's actually sort of a theory. There's an American scholar called Michael Sapol who posits that maybe McLeese might have been gay, because, the way that there's almost like a eroticism to these beautiful dead men on the table.
Yeah.
I mean, look at it. He's got sort of like looks like he could wake up and, hand me a sherry, and we could have a great talk about something.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
An open discussion, so to speak.
There you go.
Was he gay or was he a necrophile? There's a whole other path, really, when you deal with people that actually pick up the bodies. As a nurse, you had to be prepared for the moment of death in so many ways. And then very quickly...
I know, when I was working in the nursing home, I actually got to prepare a body, one of our clients that died. And I helped, because I wasn't a nurse, I was a diversional therapist. And we were a bit short-staffed that day that this person died, and we had to get, prepare this person to be picked up by the, the funeral home. And so, we had to wash and, pack and
You've got to make sure every orifice is packed, so rigor mortis is going to set in because of lividity.
Well, it depends when they're going to come and get the body. So, yeah, we had to so I got to do a few of them, and it was actually quite a really sort of cathartic experience, actually, touching and handling this person that I'd known for quite a while and dealt with on a daily basis at work. And then, they died, and there was sort of like this kind of closure thing. There was like this journey that, I met them, I dealt with them, and then they died. And then I got to say like this goodbye and a preparation. So I was actually quite, when they died, it was like, okay, that was closed, that chapter of having known this person, instead of them, coming in one day and they go, oh yeah, so-and-so died last night, and they're gone. And it's like, oh, how do I deal with this stuff? The process, work through it, and having done this, it actually gave me that sort of closure and saying goodbye and being able to let them go and move on. You know what I mean?
Well, because in my career, I did a story a while ago on death doulas and people that work in this space, and there is a lot of kind of research. It kind of makes sense on a mammal front, doesn't it? If you spend time with someone who has died, like a loved one, on a very deep level over the course of a day, if you actually sit with them, then it's almost like in your body you will feel that they were dead. You know how like animals go back to hang out with something that's died. It's sort of I think it's a very important thing on a quite deeply mammalian front that you can spend time with the dead, because it makes you really feel it.
You actually you experience it, whereas we don't experience the death of, unless somebody's actually they're sick and you have the time sitting with them, talking, going through a process. But when somebody dies suddenly, and then because of the way our society has corporatized, birth and death and all those things, it's actually taken away from us all those rituals that people used to do before, business stepped in to monetize all these, human experiences. People used to have to deal with it on a very hands-on
well, the guy down the road or the lady down the road would, make the coffin. Someone would, actually dress the person. I mean, the thing that I found super interesting researching the book was also all these ideas around the soul and how that plays out in the anatomy lab. And, for some of the older doctors that I interviewed, for them, the person on the table was sort of they moved between being a specimen and a person, being a specimen and a person. And apparently, I mean, I didn't spend any time in a contemporary dissecting room. It's quite impossible to get into them these days. And the thing that came up, though, especially in New Zealand, there's all these really fascinating studies around the soul and how students can find the death quite confronting, but also they can find particular organs confronting. So people have issues with the brain. Right. People will have issues with the heart. And like, I don't know. I mean, when I was researching, I would say to like, where do you think you've got a soul? I'm asking you to, do you think you've got a soul? And like, where is it? Is it in a particular spot? Like some of my friends would point to their chest. I sort of, I don't know, it's kind of a weird, and the thing is, I'm an atheist, right? So I found all this kind of thinking about this stuff quite fascinating because, well, I didn't really think of.
Yeah, when I was looking at these people that had died, it was like I was looking at them intently, and I thought, whoever this person is actually now gone. This is just a container for that person, that soul, that individual. It's like this is what's left now is a container. And so it was like I had no problem with dealing with the body because I knew that person was actually gone from that body.
Well, this is the thing. It's kind of part of the reason why it's very hard to get bodies in some parts of the world, because people don't believe that. They believe that the body it's very important that the body is buried and that, there's all sorts of kind of, for example, in Zulu culture, because I looked into some research into, because in Africa, not many people donate at all. And it's kind of quite a political issue, actually, that the majority of bodies that are studied are Anglo bodies. Actually, out of it, Anglo people are more inclined to donate. Although in parts of Asia, it's becoming more common. But I thought that was particularly in Zulu culture, like you actually, the body has to be buried, and people do need to return to the gravesite to, enact sort of particular spiritual practices in terms of, talking to the person in their afterlife and that kind of thing. So it was kind of, so, I mean, I thought that, I mean, I haven't spent time with a dead body like you obviously have professionally, but that was the other thing I found really interesting too, is that everyone's got such a different take on it. Some people go, oh yeah, the body's just, the person's gone. But other people say, well, no, actually they can really feel someone.
Did you find that there were anatomists that sort of fell into the 9.5 gram sort of scenario, that they would perceive that there was a moment between life and death when the soul liberated itself from the body?
Anatomists wouldn't get the body, wouldn't get them when they're alive. They'd receive.
But there must have been people along this line of research
that
maybe had that thought of the survival of death, surviving death itself.
As the anatomists tend to get the bodies go to a dissecting room when some people are very dead. But I did hear some ghost stories.
Okay,
please tell us.
Yeah, well, yes, because we are on strange incidents in the Southern Hemisphere.
Oh, yes, we are.
Yep.
And so there were a couple of ghost stories, and then some anatomists had some freaky experiences. So, I mean, in terms of the ghost stories, one technician told me about a person who arrived at the anatomy lab, and this person was quite young, and he apparently hadn't consented. So his wife had done the paperwork, which in Australia it can actually happen, but it doesn't happen often. And this person, the guy, had sort of like scars on his leg, and they thought that maybe he'd been a cyclist. Anyway, they put him in the freezer, and all of a sudden they heard this kind of rattling on the door, and apparently the funeral director said, "Oh, I'm out of here, man. This is weird." And then the next day, at around the same time, the lights went on and off. And then a year later, basically when you embalm someone, you usually let them sort of cure, for want of a better word, for about a year or so. And apparently all the electricity went out in the building. There was like this weird, and, the technician rang the security, and the security said, "Oh, we don't know what's going on." And then this technician said, "Oh, you know what? I'm going to check the date." And he said it was a year to the day that this guy had arrived. And so, he said it was sort of all just a bit spooky. But it's funny, a couple of technicians and anatomists I have mentioned the ghost element, and they all go, "Oh, yeah, some of them have got little stories." But one freaky thing, one German technician told me that what a terrible thing to do. Apparently his friend lay on the anatomy table, and this sort of cleaning lady came in one night to do her cleaning, and he put his hand out and grabbed her leg, like in the middle of this room with all these bodies. And I was like, what a jerk.
That's enough to give you a heart attack.
Yeah, she would have died.
You know what? We had some skullduggerous moments with undertakers. Now, the profession of undertaking is quite an interesting field when you examine the people that apply for that sort of employment. But we had
not casting any aspersions.
We had, and we won't talk about the nursing home we're working in as therapists. One of several that we were attached to, and our was it one of our nursing staff, one of our head sisters was having a relationship?
No, that was a diversional therapist.
Right.
She was diversional therapist.
So they were going up to the morgue during lunchtime and getting it down, getting it on the slab. And that became sort of the cantina talk.
Oh, God.
And I had some astounding moments working in the inner city in welfare where rigor mortis had set in because we had such a hefty workload and so few employees. And there were these couple that used to come in, and they would have like a white cuff and a top coat. underneath, like a
but
greasy
a
old
bib,
T-shirt.
bib,
Bib
was
bib.
like the white. They didn't wear a shirt. They just put this bib
It's like
on.
something out of a
That looked-
60s early British film. And they would walk in, and I can remember one, in the room with this person that I cared about, and the legs had actually gone upwards, the lividity bent up, and they just grabbed those legs and broke those bones in front of me really rapidly, really loudly.
It's like,
and
just straighten that out.
And then
It's
we're
like,
out the door,
Yeah.
and it was like something shocking.
Yeah.
But they were so callous and
not callous, they were blasé about it because they probably did it so many times, I'd say.
So did you discover a nefarious side to the undertaking profession? A sort of outrageous side?
Well, Indiana, look, not really. I mean, I heard a few kind of silly stories, like students kind of freaking out. Like, I think it's kind of young kids. When kids go to medical school, they're pretty young. And a lot of them wouldn't have seen a dead person, B, someone naked. So I did hear I did hear one story about there was a guy that put some testicles in a girl's handbag, and I think she found them and then freaked out, and he got kicked out of uni. I heard another story about someone being, this is all like in the 50s and the 60s, someone being silly with a penis. And the thing that I find, is that I think we all have this expectation that, we're robots, like people that work in the funeral business or people that work with death are sort of like these sort of quiet, mournful people that stand around all day. And but the reality is it's a job, and all of us have jobs that we make jokes and, kind of have fun with. And so I found everyone actually keeps asking me about bad stories. I mean, if you want the bad story, I mean, I'm sure there are bad stories. The really terrible stuff is, like it's well documented, is from the 1800s and the 1900s. Like in England, before the introduction of this thing called the Anatomy Act in 1832, you had like grave robbers. Like in America in the 1800s in medical school, it was BYO body.
Yeah.
So people had to go and actually dig up a grave to bring the body to uni, which is pretty intense. Yeah. And so, I think these days, because, everything's so strict and, corporate culture, but also the thing is for anatomists to get bodies, like so that people feel comfortable donating, I think they're pretty strict. Like I didn't actually spend much time with, I was interested in the past, like what happened to my grandparents' bodies. So I do not know what happens in a modern anatomy lab, but I get the vibe that if you took a photo, you'd be kicked out. Like if you do, something super silly, you get kicked out. But I think if kids are standing around a leg and making a joke about a leg, I don't think that's the end of the world, is it? Like,
no, of course not.
No.
I mean, taxidermy is another thing. And down at what is the National Archives, that used to be pre-Second World War, a taxidermy museum, I believe, where if you had lost a leg or a limb, that might be brought back and put in a diorama of supposedly historical significance. Did you discover anything about that? Because evidently there is a lot of those dioramas still down there, but never to be exposed to the public again. So
where's this?
This is in Canberra at the National Archives, and it was a historical museum, evidently, with all this incredible sort of abhorrent taxidermy based on your relatives that have served and maybe have lost a limb or died.
Yeah. Oh, wow. So no, I didn't come across that. Like there's a really crazy 1700s guy called Frederick Reusch. And he did really full-on stuff with skeletons of fetuses, and they're these incredible dioramas. And in the like the little fetus, they're wearing pearls, and they've got there's kind of these incredible elaborate, and most of the collection is now in St. Petersburg, I believe. But Frederick Reusch did some pretty hardcore diorama stuff. I mean, the thing is, because I did go to a couple of anatomical museums, and I was recently in Europe and got access to a few, like, because they're open to the public in many parts of the world. And the they're pretty. Some of the dissections are kind of amazing. Like, it's a total art form. Like, it's really, I don't know how they. I think it takes a lot of time and practice. But the thing I really found shocking was that a lot of anatomists told me that they love dissecting. Like, they lose track of time and they'll just be in there sort of cutting away, studying a particular nerve or something, and then, they just get lost in it. So I found that kind of amazing that people really get into it. But no, I haven't heard about the taxidermy.
And I think, that it's interesting that you stated that about Royce, because maybe it was the fact that taxidermy and dioramas were a huge thing in the 1800s. And, they'd have these big glass cabinets. We've actually gone to some auctions where you'd see like 5 cats giving a small chimpanzee a haircut or something like that. And it was a massive diorama. And I think that might have actually just sort of
there was no television.
Bled across into this notion of dealing with war and putting in these historic dioramas.
You had to entertain the people. You
certainly did.
The thing about that sort of taxidermy stuff is, like, with Royce, he used to he had sort of a secret recipe at the time. So you can imagine what he was doing was pretty spectacular. People were pretty fascinated. And he had this secret preservative, and it's only recently that they've discovered that Royce was using I think it's clotted pig's blood and the mineral Berlin blue and mercury oxide was what he was using to maintain, like, because in his dioramas, aside from the little fetuses, he's also got embalmed tissues. And so it definitely was sort of a craft, because in those days they didn't have fridges.
No.
So they had to, unless you stuffed things, and for the anatomists, they had to move quick. They had to dissect very quickly.
Formaldehyde evidently became a pretty massive injectable drug habit for many people. And evidently, as the tales go, Bela Lugosi
he was
used
not
to shoot up formaldehyde.
A formaldehyde addict.
Oh, what's the buzz like, I wonder?
I've got no idea. Is it just you go into catatonia instantly? I've got no idea. Let's work through these images that Jackie sent us. I'm very curious that we speak to them.
Because there's some image. These are some of the images in.
And did you find what actually happened to your grandparents?
That's what I was going to ask Jackie.
This is one of my favorite books in the entire world, and I believe.
Okay, so this is kind of amazing. So I don't know if you knew this, but the reason why books have sections and chapters is because of anatomy. So, like, basically, this idea of sort of cutting up, analyzing and dissecting a topic, it began around the late 1500s. And so originally the word section, it comes from
so fascinating.
Yeah, it comes from dissecting a body. And it was like, apparently it was first recorded in like an English dictionary in 1559. Right. And the guy, so there's this historian called Richard Sugg who's done all this amazing work around it. But so you've got the word section coming from dissection, but then books with anatomy in the title became all the rage. And so that's why you've got, and Burton's is the most famous one, Anatomy of Melancholy, but you've also got like all these great titles from, between the 1580s up until the sort of 1650s, like Anatomy. I was just looking at some of them the other day. The Anatomy of the English Nunnery at Lisbon was written in 1622. The Anatomy of Urines, the Anatomy of Jewels, like as in having a fight. So, so that's why, I just think that's really fascinating. I don't think most people realize that why we have sections and chapters in books is because of, anatomy was all the rage like in the 1500s. And so you've got all these like plays and books that were written about anatomy. And did you do John Donne at school?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so I didn't, like at school we did like kind of the wake up morning sun, I love you kind of. But John Donne also had like a whole bunch of dissection poems.
Really?
Okay.
Did he give eulogy for a churchyard? That is a poem I've been trying to fathom for years, and I'm sure I've got the title wrong, but it always hit me emotionally. It was about the lost potential of everyone in the churchyard that had now passed on.
John Dunny's so sensitive, isn't he? He's like, I didn't realize. And so his dissection ones are kind of a bit erotic, you know, they're sort of a bit like kind of, oh, cut me up, my lover. And, you know, they sort of really tapped into this sort of fantasy. So around the idea of what it's like to be dissected.
Isn't that interesting? Because Nabokov, even in Lolita, gets sort of into the body parts there and that notion of eroticism as well. So I'm wondering if is there this line of rumbling necrophilia running through these people. Anyway, let's have a look at this next image. That is brilliant. That's where we got chapters from, dissection.
So this is a very important thing. And so this is Joseph McLeish, the guy that I really love, the Irish British surgeon who did all these, you know, their sort of erotic sketches. These are some drawings he did of the aortic arch, right? So if you look really closely, you can see how they're all different.
Yeah.
And so this is this thing that is quite a big deal in anatomy. It's called variation. So even though, you know, we all think we're same on the inside, you've got a heart, lungs, etc. We're all just a tiny bit different.
Right.
Yeah, remarkable.
You know, and so it explains why, I don't know, some people want to be astronauts and some people want to, I don't know, work in corporate banking or whatever. Like it just is human variation. And apparently variation is the reason why, you know, you have surgical accidents.
Right.
Is because people can have little bits of difference. But also there's this this vein here in your wrist called the palmaris longus. And I've got it.
Yeah.
Apparently only 17% of people don't have it. So I thought I really found that drawing of those aortic arches kind of inspiring because it's like, oh yeah, we're all a little bit different.
Yeah.
That is fascinating.
So your insides don't all develop exactly the same way. There's just always variation.
There's just all these like lots of little crazy things little differences that we've all got.
Right.
Let's have a look at these green lungs.
Oh, well, I don't know if they're green lungs, but they just
wow.
Oh yeah, so this is this particular type of kind of preservation, and it's quite complicated. But basically, you pump something a fixer inside the. So I think those are. Is that inside? Is that a section of a lung? And so this is really
of a lung. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is I mean, this is quite spectacular. So in the anatomical art scene, and there is kind of a lot of people find this stuff the most sort of inspiring. So this is that's right. They're called corrosion casts, and these specimens are from the 1960s. And what you do is you put silicone and a bit of plastic resin, and then you let it harden, and then they destroy the tissue, leaving these perfect casts. So that's right. This is the brain and a liver, I think. Yeah. So it just shows you and I think that's the thing I really came to realize is, I mean, that looks like a root system in the garden, doesn't it?
It does, doesn't it? Yeah.
Or
I'm going back.
Go on.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say it's like this Celine Dion, we're so beautiful on the inside, you know, like.
But I think that a root system in the garden, the fascinating thing to me has always been, and especially dealing in the world of the anomalous, is the microcosm and the macrocosm, how we seem to actually replicate the internal structure of ourselves in the real world. I mean, look at the wiring that we go through to set up music venues and things like that. It's like arteries and leads. And they're even finding now with the James Webb telescope, looking out into deep space and dark matter, that it's beginning to look very neurological. And so a lot of cosmologists are perceiving that space is not empty. It mightn't be material, but is that where consciousness exists?
Oh yeah, look, I mean, because I spent so much time looking at anatomical art, and you can just see, there's like these veins in our eyeballs, and it's like the flash of lightning. If you look at a beautiful sketch of a dissected breast, for example, it's like these beautiful leaves inside my boob, inside the breast. So it's sort of the way that we're mirrored in nature, I think that's the one thing that I really I think about it a lot now. I mean, and I think it's interesting too that people are so into fitness and their bodies, right? Like, looking good. And I just think, God, we just really have any idea about our bodies, do we?
No, we don't.
No.
We still don't. We still have so much to learn. One thing that excited me as a child, and we still have in the building, and I should have pulled them out, is we have the Remco models of the visible woman the visible man.
Yeah.
And so they were literally like your medical dummies, but on a smaller model level, and you would build them, and then one would have like a dissection.
Yeah.
Side.
Yeah, see, I've got this at Officeworks.
Yeah, right.
Oh, you got that at Officeworks. Wow.
Yeah.
That is beautiful.
Yeah, so you can take him apart. I lost his liver for a while and then I found it on the desk. But this has been quite helpful. Like I actually now realize, like, so when I've got a tummy ache now or I've got a sore arm, I actually do Google anatomy of leg or anatomy of something, just so I've got an idea of what's going on inside. So that's the little heart there.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Wow. How gorgeous. You've got a much bigger heart than that, Jackie. Let's have a look at the infidels here. We know it. Here we go. Yes.
What is that?
I know this is just these insane waxworks. So pretty much, for before photography, before, how are you going to keep a record of what the inside of the body looks like? So there's this massive scene of all around the world, all this amazing waxworks. And I was actually in Vienna recently and visited the collection of a guy called Clement Sassouni, who's like the king of waxworking. And it's just insane how beautiful and kind of expert it is. And so they were, a surgeon or doctor in the 1800s, they would have studied from these for sure to get a sense of what was going on. Yeah. And in part of the book, I actually I interviewed there's only a couple of wax workers left in the world. And so I interviewed this awesome woman called Eleanor Crook. I think these might be plastic models, these ones. Yeah, they look plastic. I interviewed Eleanor Crook, who's this really amazing anatomical artist in the UK. And it's interesting, there's a couple of artists that actually do dissect and teach students about dissection. It doesn't really happen much in Australia. I think there's one anatomical art dissection class maybe at ANU, but I think Australia is pretty uptight about all this stuff. And but I found those waxworks are pretty, like, I don't know how, it's just incredible how they did it.
So how difficult was it to actually interview these people that are in these professions that are not really spoken about?
Yeah, look, that's, especially I was working on the book during COVID, so you can imagine what's more secretive, like an anatomy lab in COVID.
Yeah, right.
I mean, look, I slowly stumbled across really cool anatomists that wanted to talk. So there were definitely ones that were open, and then I found technicians, and it was just a very long, slow process. Some universities were terrible, like just talk to the hand, like just would not have anything to do with me, don't want to talk about it, which I have a lot of issues with, because I do think that science needs to open the doors, and I think this is a door that does need to open. Like, why, as a writer, I think that I should be allowed into an anatomy lab to write about what's happening, and
especially if they're getting people, donated.
Well, yeah, but I think there's a lot of paternalism as well. Like, I think they think, the donors won't like that, but I interviewed a couple of wannabe donors.
Okay, yeah.
And they were like, yeah, cool, whatevs, like just, I opened the door. There's one really
reason from them why they wanted to donate?
Yeah, well, so again, the two anatomists the two donors I spoke to were wanting to help science. So, they wanted students to learn about their knees and that kind of thing. But just going back to how hard it is, like I did find one amazing anatomist in England called Professor Claire Smith at Brighton Uni, and she's written this really full-on book actually, which goes into great detail about what actually happens.
So what's the name of that book?
Is it called The Silent Teacher? But yeah, so she was great. Like, and she said that, people want to know what goes on in the anatomy lab. Like people want the information, and they, you know, because she would go to talks about body donation and people just wanted all the gory details. And the thing is that most people that donate their bodies know that it's not going to be like, they know they're probably going to get chopped up. They don't think they, you know, but she also, you know, in her book, she tells, it's such a British book, you know, how what the Brits are like. She writes about sort of these crazy anatomical dreams that she has, like, because you can imagine, like, she's in an anatomy a lot, so she dreams about dead bodies. And but she also talked about, you know, having to get a saw from the hardware shop. She talks about having to sometimes they've got legs and they need to fit them back in the fridge like Jenga.
Right, okay, yeah.
So she was, you know, so there are a few. I managed to track down anatomists that were keen to talk, but generally, you know, the profession is pretty closed for obvious reasons. Like, I think they're just all very nervous. But also they argue that it's to respect the donors and the dead, but I think that they're probably a bit paternalistic at times.
So a sense of exclusivity there. You'd
have to have a bit of gallows humour to be working with that stuff all the time, wouldn't you?
I mean we had to have gallows humour in doing what we were doing at times. But listen, let me tell you a little anecdote. We had a great go-go girl with us during the height of the Sounds of Seduction in the 90s, and she worked for one of these. She worked on the lab in Sydney Uni. And she would phone me up and go, look, I'm going to be a little late tonight. We've got 2 more bodies coming. I've just chopped an arm up. I've got a penis in the fridge.
I've got to get this part ready for the students. They're coming in to do that.
And I mean, the thing is, these people are so, like, the salaries that technicians get isn't that high. You know? Like, it's obviously not a job that many people want to do, but it's such an important job. Like, you know, I feel like it's probably the most hardcore job out there, and good on her for doing it. I don't think I could do it, but you know,
it was gallows humour with her though.
It was
24/7.
Absolutely,
and then,
because that's the way she got through it.
I had that moment in the late 70s, being enchanted by industrial hardcore music, as every insecure white male is, and there was a band called SPK, which were trying to actually be philosophically confronting like punk was. They actually broke into the medical museum and did some skullduggerous filming for the video they released with people's body parts. I'm not going to... No. We're not going to explain that. But let me think. The name of that first album's not coming to me, but I have got the Betamax tape on the shelf there.
Of course, you've got the Betamax.
I've got the Betamax, and you know what? In that, poor people's body parts are being worked around other people's body parts in a very abstract yet sexual way. And I was thinking, poor old mom and dad, what's happening to them? But people were doing that. Now, here is one last anecdote. I can remember going down at 6:30 a.m. to nursing allocations after I'd had a day off sick, and you had to sit there and listen to these old spinster nurses that were sucking hankies dipped in scotch and giving you hell. And in the trees, the boys from the college, I won't name that college, adjacent to RPA had gone down to the morgue and taken someone's body, and it was hanging from the branches above.
Oh, wow, that's edgy.
Yeah, that was very edgy.
That was in the late 70s.
Yeah, so those
I mean, look, I reckon, in a way, probably my book's probably a bit soft. Like, I probably should have put more of that sort of scandal. I don't know. I guess I was just more interested in the story of the people that do it. And, you know, I chucked a few kind of those sort of naughty stories, and I'm sure there's millions more out there, you know. But I mean, the thing that's sort of just a little bit mean about because the part of the reason those anatomical museums are closed to the public is that a lot of those specimens were collected in Australia from unclaimed bodies, and in particular from people who were usually poor and often mentally unwell. So when I was researching the book, I found out that my great-great-great-grandfather was also dissected.
Right.
Because so he died in Beechworth Mental Hospital down in Victoria. And in those days, you were just dissected. It was part of it was like the doctors just dissected you. So I think that's part of the reason why these museums are closed off, and why, I don't know, but look, it just depends on your attitude towards your body. Like, how would you know, if you didn't want to be dissected and then you were, how would you know? Because you're dead, right? But
yeah, exactly.
And everyone has different views. Like, I spoke to some technicians that are like, well, you're dead, you might as well use the body, that kind of thing. But I think that the museums need to open the doors a bit more and tell the story of what used to happen, that in Australia, up until maybe even the 1980s, people who died in mental hospitals were dissected. You know, this is the story of medicine. This is the story of science that, like, you know, we need to be looking at.
And this is the story, in a sense, of eugenics that we've had running through our culture for a long time. That, you know, those institutionalized people lose all their rights completely.
They have no rights.
I think you've written this book highly appropriately. Those crazy ambulance stories, those crazy undertaker stories, those crazy, you know, mortuary stories are endless. But there are a dime a dozen, and I just see them as a side effect of not dealing appropriately with death. It becomes something like boys giggling about sexuality, as you said, you know, the shock of actually seeing a nude body, even, you know, as opposed to seeing a dead one, all of a sudden brings out inappropriate behavior because it's hidden from us so extensively. I think you've actually done an incredible research service for the public here, and I think it's an exciting read. It's a magnificent book. Did you find out what happened to your grandparents? Where are they today?
Well, I kind of have an idea of what might have happened. So, like, they were likely dissected. Their full bodies would have been dissected over the, you know, likely. So I tracked down, you know, doctors and surgeons that were in the anatomy lab when my grandmother's body was there.
Right.
So I have a sense of what happened, you know, in terms of the dissection, you know, what would happen with a medical degree. I have an idea about the embalming situation. It's more than likely that they weren't sketched because there were no anatomical artists at UQ at that time. There's a possibility that they were researched. Like, so I came across some hand surgeons, and like this guy called Marius Farah, who was a hand guy, and, you know, maybe they studied their hand. I sent you an image of a party trick, actually, that I've learnt researching the book, where if you get an egg and you hold it in your hand and squeeze it as tightly as possible, you can't crack the egg.
Right.
So I had a book event.
No,
I had a book.
No.
Oh, okay, yeah. Anyway, so it's related to the Spira mirabilis, and the way that our hands curve, and so maybe they contributed to some hand research, but so I have a fair idea of what happened, but I still don't. I mean, I wouldn't donate my body. Do you think you two would?
No, I wouldn't donate my body. I've put down to be an organ donor. They can have everything that they want from me, but as long as there's a bit of a shell that the family can burn, because I've always wanted to be cremated. I never wanted to be buried, but I thought you may as well take everything out of me that you can. You know what I mean?
See, the reason I don't want to be dissected, this is going to sound really ridiculous, is that I reckon I'd be cold. Like, this is so, I just keep thinking about
I love that. That is so gorgeous of you.
I know, but I imagine, even though I'm like a torso or a head sitting on the table, like I want someone to put a jumper over me or a doona or something, you know, like I'm just worried that I'd be cold. What about you, Jay? Do you reckon you could do it?
Well, you know what? I had a moment with Coffin Ed. It's amazing, all these death pseudonyms that we used, who was our partner in crime on the Naked City radio show. And when we're doing that show, we did numerous moments talking about the incredible work the Garvin Institute were doing researching the brain. And Coffin Ed instantly signed up and donated his brain for dissection.
Yeah, his brain's going.
And I was like, you know, he's a writer like yourself. I would love to assume that I could write, and that's an assumption.
Well, we do know you can talk, Jay. We know you can talk.
Thanks for that. I'm not sure which way to take that, but you know,
I've been thinking about this lately. Actually, like the power of, you know, like the rise of podcasting. I think it just returns to this ancient desire of just storytelling. You know,
That's
Yes.
what it
Anyway,
is.
just cough and Ed in the brain. Keep going.
A good old conversation. So he donated his brain to the Garvan Institute. I was afraid that on death they'd dissect my brain and find nothing in there. So I said, forget that. Well, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
But I certainly have.
No, you know what they'd find? They'd find some tiger print in there, like, some sort of, I don't know, sounds of seduction. What sort of beats do you reckon would be in there, Jane? Like,
well, there you go.
Well, there's lots of different beats.
Such an interesting point. So many avenues that you went down in researching this. You're an astounding researcher, and you bring so much heart to it as well. And the way that you speak about the people that you interviewed, what have you taken away as an author from this incredible investigation and journey?
I reckon the weird thing now is that like when people say, "Oh, what's the book about?" I go, "Oh, dissection." And like to me, dissection seems really normal and like a natural part of science and medicine. But I know that it's really quite awful. Like for many people, it's a very confronting thing. So I guess it's the humanity of science. That's one thing, but also just that science isn't necessarily objective. Like scientists aim to be objective. They aim to, tell the universal truth, in a very controlled manner. Like, so I think it's really changed my perception of science. Like I used to think of scientists as like people in white lab coats who would talk very politely to each other and were a bit nerdy. But the thing I've realized is that science is pretty wild, actually, and just little details. Like apparently, dissection rooms all around the world are very different. So they use different chemicals. They store the bodies differently. They have different furniture. They use different saws. Some universities give their bodies a name. Some universities don't. Some universities have there's this increasing thing called the humane anatomy movement, where the medical students actually meet the families of the donor, which is it particularly happens in Asia. So I think that's the thing I've really realized is that science is kind of as wild as the arts in a way, that it is a very human endeavor. And so it sort of just made me kind of like science a bit more, maybe. And not that I've ever disliked science, but I feel a bit more confident now with it. Like I was pretty nervous writing a book about a scientific subject.
Sure.
I think
but also now, and also too now, I feel like I could have a discussion about the human body, which I think is pretty important because it's sort of, I can talk about the body in a different way now. And so, I like that as well.
I'm really curious about this whole interest from an incredibly young age, philosophically, in the notion of death in you and exhuming bodies. Of course, back there,
one budgie. Come on,
but still, it's been a fascination.
You know what? I found out that heaps of people have done this. Actually, I got a text from someone the other day saying she laughed because she dug up her guinea pig. So I have had a few.
Wanted to see.
It does sound a bit Jeffrey Dahmer, doesn't it? But I have had a bit of feedback. I was a bit embarrassed about that, especially when the publisher puts it on the back about me digging up my budgie.
But that's a very natural thing.
It's not Dahmer. Dahmer was killing them.
Yeah,
he wasn't digging them up.
Yeah, he wasn't
digging them up. Don't they say that serial killers start by... No, they kill the animals.
They torture animals. They torture
animals.
I
was just but my budgie died and I was really sad and I wanted to see what he looked like.
We're all curious, and especially children. They don't have filters. So they're going to be curious about, it's like, what's happened to my pet now that it's been put in the ground? Let me see what's happening to it. But also, that's just a natural.
But also, I was thinking of that thing that is written in your bio on this book, which is about every new country you go to, you seem to want to have a look at the graveyards first.
Oh yeah, well I do love it. I think it's also connected to probably my mother. Like we lived near a big graveyard in Brisbane called Toowong Cemetery, and then we moved to the Philippines. But I don't know, like I'm a big history buff, right? And I just have always really been into, like, because I find graveyards very historical places. I mean, in the Philippines as well, we used to go to full-on horror films when I was probably quite little.
Yeah.
And do you remember that film Creep Show?
Yeah.
Oh yes. George
Yeah,
Romero.
yeah, and so you know that scene where the skeleton climbs out of the grave and wants its birthday cake?
Yeah.
I want to replicate that for my funeral.
Can I tell you that scene? I must have been. What year did that film come out? Whatever year that film
80s,
came out.
like
it was
86
80s,
or something.
Yeah, mid
That
80s.
had a huge impact on me. That was I was just thought that was the most amazing, freaky, So I think that it's just all these various events like horror films and being in the Philippines and having like a mother who's she was a nurse in Sydney, and she used to have these stories about at night they would burn the amputated body parts and the sort of the smell. So I don't know. I guess those sort of stories just sort of like struck me, and I sort of found it really interesting. And because it's so hidden now, isn't it too? Like especially in Australia. So I know it's very you could really put me on. But I actually think I'm quite normal. Really?
Yeah, you are.
Oh, yeah, you are. I mean, look.
Yeah, I don't think the death thing is that weird, but it's kind of weird the way people go.
Around us all the time.
I want to talk it out because I love the notion of embracing that. And look, one thing we did as children, we went down to that crumbling graveyard next to the North Shore Hospital in St Leonard's and spent many hours, days and nights there frolicking through and fascinated by the history.
6, you know?
Yeah, we get home at 7 with numerous little ghost stories.
Oh, my God.
But, it's interesting that you brought up Creepshow because I think it was produced by George A. Romero and it was basically a series of vignettes, wasn't it?
Yeah,
it was like
that film was so... I loved that film.
Yeah.
Well, interesting there because Romero is seen, the late great George A. Romero, as the man that brought the modern day zombie film into fruition with Night of the Living Dead.
Yeah.
He was from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, the home of the Nickelodeon. But he also, his mum and dad had a connection with the local abattoir and the butchers. So it was the first time on the screen that visceral, anatomical guts
were seen,
intestines were seen en masse.
Yeah, in a film.
So it's fascinating that you sort of strike on that point with Creepshow because there's really a huge historical reference in terms
but
of
also like kind of, I mean, this podcast is about sort of strange incidents and, like my favorite book as a child was Strange Stories, Amazing Facts. It's like a Reader's Digest one.
Network.
Oh,
so it's
I loved all that. I was obsessed with the Loch Ness Monster and, like I used to watch, in the Philippines also we saw vampire films. And
they're incredible.
What was
and someone actually said to me the other day,
the Atwang in which comes for the soul of unborn children.
All that sort of stuff.
And it will actually fly down.
Oh, it's out of control.
Onto the private parts and suck that fetus out.
Yeah.
And
it's
fly off with it.
Yeah, I think these are really important stories, aren't they? They are very important stories that, I feel like maybe I don't really hear as much or when we were kids in Australia, we had bunyips, I suppose, but I kind of like that sort of mysterious unknown. But it was funny. Someone the other day we were talking about, she's into zombie films and I'm more into vampire films. And we were saying, are you guys more zombie or vampire? I'm definitely more vampire.
I'm zombie. Big time.
I like to remain open to all of it. I'm fascinated by the lot. I'm so glad you brought up that Reader's Digest book because
my gosh, you know what? I've actually just got a copy just sitting right here. Like it's seriously, and I read it to my son.
It's a huge compendium. We gave Craig a copy of it. We found a second copy, and I think it was in the 70s.
Can I go grab it? I'm going to go grab it.
It's very well researched, and it's an important book, Aspasia.
Yes, absolutely.
Why your memory's not triggering there? Look at that.
Strange Stories. Yeah.
That is
Amazing
such an
facts.
important book.
Absolutely.
And you know what? It's like I'm so glad you're bringing this up because I think that science and the skepticism of the world of the anomalous, science should marry itself to the world of the anomalous.
Absolutely.
Because the skeptics never stick to their original etymology. They should go back and look at the dictionary definition because the majority of the time they come across as bloody opinionated bastards.
They're debunkers.
But the truth is that you've got to balance eyewitness testimony up against scientific reductionism.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, if we've got a huge amount of qualified eyewitnesses, Like you have
kind of got to start taking
F-18
notice.
Super Hornet pilots, are they hallucinating when they see these Tic Tacs? Because get them out of the canopy of that $1 billion aircraft if they are.
Yeah.
So I think it's fascinating to be open to it all.
I mean, like the Loch Ness Monster. I mean, I was so fixated on the Loch Ness Monster, and then I gave talks about it at school as a child, and when it was finally revealed that one particular photo was a fake, I had the worst day. I was just so upset.
What, Jackie? There is a lot of debate about that photo being a fake.
Yeah.
And there is incredible, great.
Don't give me hope. Don't give me false hope.
No false hope.
Not false.
There is great independent research being done. There's an astounding researcher into Ogopogo.
Yeah.
I want you to go up on that Untold radio site and take a good look at some of the podcasts.
Oh, yeah.
There are remarkable cutting-edge female researchers in situ in Canadian lakes and Loch Ness, tracking these things with military radar, with sonar.
I've got to say, though,
great work.
A friend of mine went to Loch Ness recently, and I said, "Oh, can you get me some merch, like just something like a hoodie or a pencil?" And the hoodies were bad.
Okay.
They were just really daggy, the font, and it was just like, I just thought they could have done better.
Merch,
it's the crockery merch you're after. We had a beautiful porcelain Loch Ness, and we broke it.
But
anyway.
No, was it a mug or what? Gosh, I was
No, it was actually...
It was in 4 sections.
It's 4 sections, and you put it on something, and it's like it came out of the water.
Way.
You know? Yeah, so beautiful.
So what, have you ever had an anomalous experience yourself? Has Geordie, your partner, had an experience? Is there anything creeping around that house late at night?
I don't know. Like, I mean, I think living in the Philippines, it was very ghosty. You know, the culture is very open to ghosts. And so we lived in a house that apparently had ghosts. We had these religious figures, they're called Santos.
Yes.
And so we had a bunch of them. So I've actually never had anything like kind of, I mean, I've probably willed it too much. Maybe I'm like, oh my gosh, what's that? And, like I kind of desperately want it to happen, but I just love it. Like, I think that's the other thing too, that's missing from the whole, can't we have a bit of fun in life?
A bit of mystery.
A bit of mystery. Not everything can be measured in a laboratory with a test tube.
No, can't.
I'm still fascinated with all the fairy goblin mythology. And, when you actually go to the source, there's some interesting information to say that part of that could be factual as well. And I think that myths and legends and folklore, sometimes
they come from somewhere.
They're very derogatory terms, and there has to be some truth behind these stories eventuating in the first place.
Sure.
It has been an incredible joy to spend time with you and actually
I'm just so glad I got to talk about the Loch Ness Monster. Actually, I have written a book about anatomy and dissection, but I knew we were going to head down the Loch Ness, and also that I got to show, because I am on the Strange Incidents podcast, that I got to show my favorite book. Really, it is. I wonder how many of your viewers and listeners have got this or were inspired as a kid by it.
I think that will be a trigger image for many people out there. And you know what? We are the only podcast on the Untold Radio Network that is covering the entire Southern Hemisphere. Why they did that to us. So you are going to find yourself bang smack on Saturday morning, right into the heart, which is actually Friday evening in the States.
In the States.
There's so many researchers and people that will be fascinated with your book, and I'm sure we'll run to it. How do people go about getting a copy of this astounding book?
The book up again.
The Great
Body.
Dead.
The Great Dead.
So at the moment, I've just got a publisher in Australia. So I don't have a publisher in the US or Europe, but you can buy it from the website of my publishing company called Ultimo Press. You can get the audio book and the Kindle, I believe, on Amazon.
Okay, right. Okay,
right.
So, but it's only for like
if you want the hard copy book.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, you need to order it from Ultimo Press in Australia. Maybe I'll get a book deal in the US. I'm not sure yet. Isn't it a pretty cover though? Like, it's a great cover.
And I love the way it's dissected.
Yeah,
and how extraordinary to think. This is a book where dissection, anatomy, and chaptering began to begin with. And look, if you want to own this, buy the hard copy.
Yeah.
It's really important.
Yeah.
Well, it's very historical. Like, I think that's the thing is there's a lot of reason. I probably went a bit too hard on the research, actually, because I'm a bit of a bookworm and a nerd. But the thing is, there's just so much material out there. Like, you know, there's a whole genre. We didn't even talk about medieval feminist dissection. You know, the big debate about whether vivisection happened with Herophilus in ancient Alexandria. You know, there's so much material about dissection. I think that people have always been quite fascinated by it. So, yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. But I do need to work on my line when people at a party say, "So, what's the book about?" Dissection.
Yeah,
I think that's perfect. I mean, why have we got such a problem where we're actually going down every day and purchasing cuts of body parts anyway to consume them in our nightly or lunchtime meals?
I know. Well, see, I didn't even go, like, I could have done a whole separate book on animals, like what happens with animals, but that's like, that's a whole other body of work. Like,
that's another confronting.
Well, that's just another football field of rabbit holes, and
absolutely.
Yeah, so I just stuck to the dead, the body donors and the dissected.
You know, we brought out the late, great, extraordinary person that probably was the key individual to set off profiling of serial killers in the US, Colonel Robert Ressler. And he had left the FBI, even though every country he went into when he worked independently,
he had to check in.
He had to go to the embassy. Otherwise, they were tailing him everywhere. And he spoke to us about the extraordinary case that inspired Psycho that wasn't spoken about much in the press, which was Ed Gein in Wisconsin. Now, Eddie initially started off, before killing people, he was an extensive grave robber.
Yeah.
And one of the corpses that he did, he had a very overpowering mother, and she'd passed away, was his mother. And
that's Psycho and a Texas Chainsaw Massacre are both based on that case, the Ed Gein case.
So Robert Block even was
I think it was 1956. Yeah, 1956.
So Eddie was reading a lot of books on dissection. He was reading a lot of books on curing of meat, because one of the things he did was there was a smokehouse, and he'd string these corpses up, remove the internal organs, and then, like with Mum,
he was a bit of an artist. He had a bit of an artistic bent in him, and so he started making all these mobiles, and one of the mobiles was all these different lips. So these are lip mobiles, and then he fashioned a the nipple belt. The nipple belt. So he had all these nipples, and he's
so transgressive. It's so full on.
Oh my God, he actually the story.
But in the end, he was running around in his mother's skin late at night. You look out the window in snowing Wisconsin, and there's Eddie wearing Mum.
I think what was happening with Ed Gein, Ed was probably a trans person, and he was trying to become a female. And so what he did was he got all these body parts, and he was trying to sew himself a female suit. You know, because he couldn't go to the doctor and get some injections or have, you know, the operation, because this was in the 50s. But I think he kind of channeled his, you know, at one stage he had all these little boxes, and he had all these different vaginas in them. You know, it was out of control.
But you know,
seriously.
The astounding thing is Robert Ressler, and we can say this now because Robert's no longer with us, on leaving the FBI, decided to take a few carousels of very beautiful Panavision, rich color Kodak slides.
He had amazing
slideshow. And at the end, especially for the federal police, he would pull out the skull masks that Ed Gein made that were on.
No, the facial mask.
Facial. So he would actually flay and he would actually stand there. I can remember with the federal police down in Melbourne, and they're going. He goes, see that beautiful tan?
Nice shine on
Eddie
it.
was using Crisco oil on this. And it was like, my God.
Yeah.
But, you know, just another sort of offshoot of this whole notion.
And he was, because he was trying to preserve, you know, without any knowledge of, you know, preserving, you know, skins and animal and body parts. And, you know, it was just amazing what the techniques that he'd come up with to do it.
Well, it is very, very it is sort of at the fringes of, I think that's why people are interested in it, aren't they? Because it is of the absolute fringes of of human experience. I mean, in part of the book, I go to a surgical workshop where I watch head and necks being studied by ENT surgeons, and I also went out to a forensic facility where it's at a secret location in the Blue Mountains where body donors are used and studied in various ways, and it at first I was quite.
Is that where the body farm? Where they
it's a forensic facility.
Yeah, right.
And the fascinating thing about that place is that it's all women, actually. There's a lot of women in forensic science, and I think it's related to it's called the CSI effect. But when I was out there I was looking at
CSI effect.
Well, just those shows like kind of
right, I see. Yeah.
Dana Scully, like X-Files, like a woman investigator type thing. So there's a lot of women in forensics. But, when I was out there, at these various places, the surgical workshop and then also the forensic, there was something, I thought, okay, I'm a writer, I'm studying this, and, it's very confronting, but it's also fascinating. But I also got the feeling that the people that work in this space also equally find it fascinating, and that but that they kind of it's like it's all about the science. But I do think there is something sort of, it's a very difficult space, it's sort of unknown space of why are we drawn to looking at these kind of things. And I think it's because it's the fringe of human experience. I mean, that's why people are really into all these serial killer stories. Like, but I was saying to someone the other day, I feel like serial killers were really big in the 80s and the 90s. Like that
90s, they were huge. It was,
I don't think it's like, Nirvana, we're in that era. And I feel like we've it's shifted a bit to, like, you don't hear about it as much, maybe because it was the Dharma era. I don't know. But that's an incredible story about the Psycho character. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's pretty hardcore.
Yeah.
Look, I think that, it's just another way of exercising cathartically those taboos that, something that you can't understand, that you will actually start to then
read about.
And unfortunately, it does sort of prick up that transgressive notion in culture. And I think serial killer culture is bigger than ever, especially in the US.
Oh, is it? So people
and when you see things like Dharma becoming this part of this Netflix program again.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And, serial killer art is a massive thing, people are actually purchasing that. And a lot of it is serial art. It's literally handed down death row, and people do paint by numbers.
Yeah.
So where do you go from here, Jackie? Where is your next research project taking you? And and do you have a presence? Can people get in touch with you personally?
Yeah, actually, just one thing I wanted to do is I was going to read a quote that's on the opening page of my book that sort of really sums up what we were just discussing a bit about.
Okay. Nice.
It's by a guy called Philippe Aries, who wrote a very famous book called The Hour of Our Death. It came out in 1977, and Philippe Aries is a French medievalist and anthropologist who he's got a book, it's like 1,000 pages, and it's the history of death, and it is an incredible piece of scholarship. I think he spent 25 years writing it, and it is an incredible book, and it's written in a very kind of playful tone. And what he did is for part of the book, he studied a lot of wills, and so it gave him a strong sense of like what French aristocrats and different French people wanted done with their bodies and ideas about death. Anyway, so I highly recommend it if you're interested in this area. But Philippe Aries, this is a great quote. The almost fashionable success of anatomy cannot be attributed solely to scientific curiosity. It is not hard to understand. It corresponds to an attraction to certain ill-defined things at the outer limit of life and death, sexuality and pain. And so I think that really sort of sums up a lot of the interest that, that it was this sort of unknowable space about anatomy and dissection that, it is on the outer limits. But yes, I just wanted to read that Philippe Aries quote because I think it's a really great thing about why we're an interesting idea about, why we are interested in serial killers and all these sort of crazy things that people can do. But what's next? So I'm doing a PhD at the moment. So I'm back on my PhD, which is in war studies, actually, because I used to live in Afghanistan and work for the UN in a few conflict areas. So my PhD is on the pleasures of war and how people have positive experiences in war. I'm not doing soldiers. I'm doing everybody else but soldiers. So, so that's what I'm up to. But then I'm also just sort of back to making a living and hustling as a writer and all that sort of jazz as we do in Sydney because our rents are so bloody high.
Oh, it's madness. Yeah. How can any of us afford to live here? Yeah. Jackie, do you think that actually is very similar to our doctors here? That notion of war, that all of a sudden people for the first time realize the value of their life and the excitement in that moment being so close to death actually gives their life more meaning than what they have in what may be considered the mundane day-to-day reality.
Yeah, I didn't hang out with too many contemporary like young doctors or a lot of the people I interviewed were older surgeons, doctors and technicians. But I think that they, their exposure to the dead, it was an era where they spent like a whole year dissecting a body. I think aside from teaching them a lot, like, if you talk to an older doctor in their 70s or 80s, they really know anatomy, right? Like they know the human body. But I feel like they did learn about, I think that experience with that, that long-term experience of dissecting did shape them in particular ways and probably to do with death. I think, and something fascinating, what's that expression about the bedside manner? Detached concern.
Right.
That actually comes from research that was done in a dissecting lab in the 1960s and 1950s. So I think that, doctors, look, it's kind of, would be hard for me to generalize.
That's a very esoteric concept, though, to me. As training as a nurse, they always used to utilize that. It seems like an oxymoron to me that you'd leave your emotions at the door. One of the motivational forces to get you into that work
was
is
the caring
your emotions
nature.
and the fact that I could never detach that. I would go home and, one of the highest percentages of drug use in the field is people in those professions. It's a way to cope with what they're witnessing. But I think you might have misunderstood me there. I was asking you about this notion of war.
I know, I was a bit confused about, the question. I suppose
my questions are confusing, so excuse me.
They're too long.
They're statements, aren't they? They're not questions at all.
Can I say I have been asked some pretty crazy questions during interviews, but you guys have done a great job. It hasn't, you've gone down some awesome. I really liked the psycho section. That was good. You two just went for it. It was great.
You know what? We really find your company absolutely enchanting, and we could actually make this podcast into a 24-hour TV series. And I'm looking at you there. You could actually do your own documentary series. But there was a doco years ago that affected me emotionally, and it was about a whole team of gentlemen on an offshore drilling rig, and they didn't really feel anything emotionally till that rig went up in a ball of flames. And during the 8 hours of trying to get people off that rig, you would see workers for the first time smiling and actually feeling more alive than ever.
When they were close to death.
Because they were so close to death. And do you think this is part of this statement you made about people in war zones?
Look, it's a I don't know how nerdy you want me to get. When you're doing a PhD, like it's all about the ontology, like what is war, what is pleasure. But it's interesting. There's so many different takes on the experiences that people have in war and in dramatic situations. I was reading a piece that was written in the 80s last night about the Iraq War and, the way that even the public sort of gets engaged in the intensity of it. I think that when people are exposed to something at the edge or something a bit, war is a big thing to try and generalize. It definitely does make you feel alive. That's what actually got me into doing my PhD was that I read a quote from a woman during the French Resistance. And she was interviewed by a philosopher called J. Glenn Gray after World War II. And she said, I don't want the war to come back, but I've never felt so alive. And I was like, how fascinating. So I started asking like the professors at uni, is there much about the positive experiences of war and what are some of the positive things? And there wasn't really much scholarship. So that's why I've sort of gone down that avenue. But in terms of soldiers, like there's really, there's a lot of material about some of the that some people have gone to war and it's been the time of their life.
Yeah, right.
Right. The other one curious question I have at the end is, did you ever speak to any transplant doctors about transplanting organs and that personality of that person actually becoming part of the person that got the transplant as well?
I didn't do any transplant. I mean, I have heard that theory. That's kind of quite interesting, isn't it? That people get transplanted and then have this. I did speak to actually one of my dad's cousins who was actually gave me a huge insight into why my grandparents donated their bodies. Because the thing I kept wondering is, why did they do it? Like, how did they hear about it? Because in the 1960s and 70s when they did it, it was pretty unusual.
Wasn't that big a thing? Yeah.
No, it wasn't huge. And he kept people alive during transplants, and he found it quite traumatic. He didn't like it at all. He said it was a pretty confronting thing to do, to just keep someone alive and then their organs were slowly taken out and then they died. But no, I didn't speak to any transplanty people.
Right. Okay.
All right. Well, listen, we cannot thank you enough. It has really been, well, I sincerely mean that. It has been incredibly, illuminating, fascinating. You are just so charming and glorious to spend time with. Please, with the next book, let's find some way to reconnect it into the Untold Radio Network and get you back on. And
maybe, I know.
Yeah, we just want to.
Well, thanks for having me. No, it was good. I always I see you two socially from time to time, and you're always just super fun to talk to, and you're like unsung heroes of the underground and alternate world of Sydney, and you should be given the Order of Australia or all sorts of accolades.
But you know what? In our company, Jackie, and I'm sorry to interrupting you there, but we don't need those accolades. We just need to know that people like yourself that we incredibly admire, that are absolutely astute, have the time of day to have a conversation with us. We're not academics. We cannot dance the semantic ballet. But in your company, we feel identical to you in spirit and soul. So I just really appreciate your time.
Smooth, I tell
you. At times, and then other times I'm complete wreck.
Isn't he just?
Yeah. Well, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. I'll be interested to hear how see how the viewers react to.
Well, you're more than happy to sit. This goes out at midday on Saturday, and you can come into the chat room if you've got any time. You don't have to, but people will ask you questions if you're there in the chat.
Oh, okay. Well, hopefully my son's sport has finished.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
All right. Well, and thanks for having these strange incidents in the Southern Hemisphere.
Yeah.
Well, we're down south Anomalies. The other thing, Jackie, is I'd love you to see the way they've presented us tonight on 7 Plus or 7 Mate.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm totally going to watch your show. Have you done a Loch Ness Monster one?
No. But we're wanting to expand it if we get a second season. I think Geordie will get a bit of a giggle out of it as well. And we wish you a brilliant day. And that your research just goes on and your name is championed around the world as someone that's actually uplifted all of us into a greater state of intellectual security approaching bodily death.
Yep.
Thanks for having me. It's lovely chatting.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Take good care, and we'll speak to you soon.
Bye.
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 Can we just pop her out of the room there?
Yep.
We'll pop the book back up and just...
hang on. Sorry, what were you saying?
I said kick me out, yep.
Oh,
no, we can't bear to kick you out. We're really bad at
I've got to go
goodbye.
anyway, actually. No, it's good. I think we'd be able to last for 2 hours, but you've got to do your outro, haven't you?
Yeah, we do. We do. All right, darling. Thank you so much,
Thank
Jackie.
you. Have a great day.
Bye. Okay.
All right, let's pop that book back up so people are just aware of it.
So that's The Great Dead Body Teachers by Jackie Dent.
Yeah.
Okay.
You were fantastic. Can we just have a look at Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy? I want to rebuy a copy of that. I'm sure I had the original copy of that book. That's up there.
How did you get
with
that?
Kraft Ebbing's Psychopathia Sexualis. I think it was around the same time of working with SPK and doing some skullduggerous things.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, no
Yeah.
problem. All right, darling.
So,
all right, so what have we got now?
What we need to do is make sure that we go and get our Legend Meets Science 2, because right at the moment, Untold Radio Network is trying to assist in getting up one of the most fascinating and important projects.
Very important project.
Proving the validity of the parallel hominid.
That's right.
And our cult leader, Doug Hijack.
He's not our cult leader.
But Doug, anyway.
Yeah.
The time is running out for this project. We need someone philanthropically. You know, they're asking to raise so little money. It's ridiculous. Anyway, let's hit it.
Okay.
In the depths of our world's most remote and uncharted forests, an enigma has captivated the hearts and minds of people for generations. Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Yeti. This legendary creature has been known by many names, but its existence remains one of the greatest mysteries of our time. Now we invite you on a thrilling journey into the unknown with Legend Meets Science 2, a groundbreaking documentary that will change everything you thought you knew about Bigfoot. Join us as we uncover never-before-seen strategies and cutting-edge technology that could finally reveal the truth about this elusive creature. Witness exclusive footage captured using innovative camera traps designed specifically for this enigmatic being. But what makes these camera traps so unique? And how will they revolutionize our understanding of Bigfoot? Discover how an ingenious invention, a remote-controlled interactive robot, might change everything we know about this mysterious creature. Explore fascinating theories behind Bigfoot's extraordinary abilities and uncanny ability to evade capture. Could certain individuals hold the key to finally capturing this mysterious creature on film? Delve into cutting-edge research and analysis that could provide vital clues about this enigmatic being. Separate fact from fiction as we examine popular hoaxes and analyze what sets genuine evidence apart. Join experts as they unravel astonishing insights into the true nature of Bigfoot. Will these findings change our perception of this legendary creature forever? From analyzing footprints and dental evidence to exploring Bigfoot's diet, migration patterns, and vocalizations, our groundbreaking documentary will leave you questioning everything you thought was possible. By supporting our groundbreaking documentary film series, Legend Meets Science 2, you'll not only be part of a monumental quest for knowledge, but also receive incredible rewards that will make your experience even more unforgettable. As a token of our immense gratitude, we'll immortalize your name in the credits of our groundbreaking documentary. You'll forever be linked to this epic journey as we explore the enigmatic world of Sasquatch together. Pledge your support now, and you'll receive 3 signed DVDs, Legend Meets Science and Legend Meets Science 2 Part 1 and Part 2. Plus, proudly display 2 stunning signed posters from both films, an eye-catching reminder of your contribution to this extraordinary project. Immerse yourself in captivating stories, fascinating research, and mind-blowing discoveries with our collection of 14 exclusive ebooks. From Sasquatch Central to the Freeman Bigfoot Files, these riveting reads will captivate your imagination and fuel your quest for knowledge. Be the first to get the companion ebook for Legend Meets Science 2, written by anthropologist Dr. Jeff Meldrum. Pledge at this level, and you'll receive build kits for both the Sasquatch Outpost and the Bigfoot Museum. Create a personal tribute to these legendary creatures while showcasing your commitment to uncovering their secrets. Join us for an exciting private Q&A webinar on Untold Radio AM, where we'll discuss the latest findings and answer your burning questions. Plus, enjoy a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to spend 60 minutes one-on-one with documentary producer Doug Hijack, picking his brain and learning from his vast experience in the field. Show off your love for Sasquatch with an exclusive Legend Meets Science 2 t-shirt and signed hat. Plus, receive an executive producer credit for Legend Meets Science 2, showcasing your dedication to bringing this incredible story to life. This is it, the pinnacle of rewards. Pledge at this level and receive a one-off high-powered custom-built Sasquatch Research electric bike. Pick up only. Then spend a day with Doug Hijack himself, training on the bike, enjoying lunch together, and embarking on an unforgettable bike ride as you explore the world of Sasquatch like never before. Don't miss out on these amazing rewards. The time to act is now. Pledge your support and help us bring the truth about Sasquatch to light. Meet Doug Hychek, the visionary filmmaker who has captivated audiences with his groundbreaking work in wildlife research and cryptozoology. With over 270 TV features to his name, including the hit series Monster Quest on the History Channel, Doug is a respected industry leader, credentialed technologist, camera systems inventor, and wildlife researcher. Doug has documented never-before-seen behaviors in animals such as black bears, beavers, fish, and invertebrates. His team even captured the first ever footage of a free-swimming true giant squid in its natural environment for the History Channel. But Doug's true passion lies in unraveling the mystery of Bigfoot. With decades of experience researching both known animals and yet-to-be-proven cryptids, he is uniquely positioned to deliver a captivating documentary that explores this enigmatic world. Introducing Scott Hoffman, an award-winning cameraman with an unyielding passion for capturing the extraordinary. Having traversed through 38 countries in search of breathtaking footage, Scott brings unparalleled expertise to this project. Armed with state-of-the-art 6K and 8K red digital cinema cameras and an extensive array of camera movement tools, Scott is ready to capture unprecedented footage that will leave audiences speechless. Together, Doug Hychek and Scott Hoffman form an unstoppable team, a perfect blend of passion, expertise, and technological prowess. They are more than qualified to bring this ultimate Bigfoot documentary to life, but they need your help. Support their Kickstarter campaign today and join them on this extraordinary journey as they uncover the truth about Bigfoot. Are you ready for the adventure of a lifetime?
You know, that is
I am
exhausting. My
speechless.
headphones have popped off my head.
And I want that museum diorama.
I want both of them. You know what? The last thing they need in there is and spend a night with Alex, his son, in a jacuzzi whilst overlooking. You know, it is.
Wow.
Yeah.
There you go.
Well, you know what? There is such a short time left. Someone out there, philanthropically, must have this small amount of money needed.
A couple of $100,000.
It is less than that.
I know it's less than that.
And to get it off and running, and it's such an astounding project.
Absolutely.
And, you know, let's push the boundaries of science to become more open-minded and accept that this is an extraordinary possibility.
Explore. Absolutely.
Mystery is one of the most important things in the heart of the human hominid. Anyway, you've been on Untold Radio. I feel rocked to the core after that.
Shock rocked.
Yep. And Jackie Dent, what an incredible interview. Loved it.
Absolutely.
We will catch you all next week. Thank you for being part of the show. Down South Anomalies here. Aspasia, I absolutely adore you.
Thank you, darling. All right. We'll be back next week with another interesting, incredible show. Bye.